Hi, I'm John Luna, speaking for the Madrona Gallery. This is Susannah Montague's exhibition, The Apparition, which runs from April 11th to April 26th. And just to provide a little bit of general background, I really invite you to come down. There's such an experience of being in the space and seeing how the work transforms the space. And this is the first time at Madrona that we've had a solo show of one sculptor's work. So it really is quite striking, particularly because I think light is such a huge factor in this work. So the first thing people generally ask when they come in or notice is this high level of craft, because you're seeing porcelain being used, which we associate with religious sculptures and statuettes your grandmother would have on the mantelpiece and, fine china. And so you have this tradition that's associated with porcelain of delicacy or privilege or luxury. And here it's been used in an entirely different way. And yet there's a little bit of that history tied into it. So a few things that are good to know about Susannah. One, that she's from Bowen Island, which I think will come up in some of the work. She once submerged work in crab traps to watch them grow barnacles, for example, and then used that, folded that back into her work. So that gives you a sense of how process-driven her work is. But another good thing to understand is that when she studied, she went over into the study of human anatomy, and that led her to actually work in film, doing props for movies. So you have this really interesting relationship between fantasy, deep craft and art history, and human anatomy in the work. And in fact, that human anatomy tends to also pull on bringing life and art together. So in some of Montague's work, you'll see reference to her own experience of carrying twins. So images of twin infants actually show up in a surprising number of works. Now this work, Immortelle, is a very distinctive kind of showstopper. It's a huge kind of diptych or pear. I've had people compare them to everything from lungs to the lip to kidneys to the yin and the yang. I think in a way there's a place where those things overlap, which is the notion of survival and well-being of a greater system. If we imagine the body, if we imagine the yin and yang as balance. One thing I often think of when I look at these is coral reefs that gradually bleach because of environmental devastation. So there's this sense of looking down into something and seeing these forms that were alive that are kind of in a state of suspended animation. And what's interesting here is that if you look closely, you'll see all kinds of little things that are intertwined here. There's bodies, there are, emblems of wealth, there's the use of gold luster, and there's even things that are ready-made porcelain. So here you see what looks kind of like a Bambi kind of figure, a little deer, that looks like it's from maybe the 1950s or earlier. So it has a certain kind of innocence that's in it, but all of that is sort of being mutated and changed as things come together and transform. And I've had a lot of interesting questions about that transformation. Some people see it as, one guy was here earlier today said, is this kind of macabre? And I said, well, actually, I think it's more about people's fear of change and an uneasiness about the way the world is transforming. Especially when we live with digital art, we really often forget our bodies, and our bodies become strange to us. So there's this strangeness of the body in this work that is being pushed and amplified. Also should say Susannah's deeply involved with art history. So in a lot of the works you'll find little references to art history kind of hiding in the work, sort of like Easter eggs. And in general, some broader comments. This work with all of these shapes emerging and submerging from this tangle of forms makes me think a lot about Rodin's famous sculpture, The Gates of Hell, which was about the journey into the underworld and the idea that there were all these figures of spirits of the dead who lived in this space between the living and the dead. I think there's something about that that's relatable here too. Now, may I show you one more? Okay, so come on over this way. And this is a good example of taking some of these references from art history or from culture in general, popular culture as well, and just pushing them, and in the process pushing the medium of porcelain. How much can you say with porcelain and stretch it to this kind of breaking point? I mean, also just the delicacy here, but this work has a couple of really funny kind of references or Easter eggs. One is the banana with duct tape, which almost everybody seems to know is a reference to work done by Maurizio Catalan, conceptual artist, kind of a prankster at Art Basel Miami, when he duct taped a banana to the wall and sold it for a great deal of money, and then the buyer turned around and ate it, which struck many as a horrible gesture of waste. Looking at this work in a broader context, this face, which almost looks like Japanese animation, might remind you of the work of Takashi Murakami, who's a contemporary Japanese artist, who uses anime images to actually talk about consumption and the idea that there's this kind of glut in which images repeat themselves in kind of a capitalistic world. So seeing these two things together is kind of no accident. It's also a nice, again, example of her use of materials to point out that this is actually platinum foil that is on top of that piece of duct tape. Now, something you can't see very easily, but just pretend you can, is if you come around here, there's actually a small niche in the back of this head, which is hollow, that's used to burn incense. And the whole head will fill with smoke and the incense will come out of holes that she's carefully positioned. So sacred and the profane come together a lot. Thinking of Montague's background in Catholic school as a child and ways that it influenced her and ways that she resisted and pushed back against it, I think that mingling of sort of high sacred imagery, the kind of gold and splendor used in it during the Baroque era in particular, and then this sort of sense of the profane, of entropy, of things that can't be controlled, blurring and mingling is a big part of what happens in this work. Anyway, the last thing I'll quickly say is works like this pull on so many different sources, and to me one of the triumphs of it, both craft-wise, but also aesthetically, is that it all holds together. That a piece can hold together without falling apart under the burden of all these different associations and different ideas and risks that are being taken by the artist and improvisations. So I see this as really social work. It's wonderful to come with a group and discuss it and pick it apart and fall back on someone else's perspectives rather than just see it alone. I think it's very interesting to see alone. But it's also, to me, very social art in the sense that it really does. It's almost impossible not to have a conversation.